Hello and welcome to Eppendorf Lab Channel, your home for experts and knowledge live. I'm Matthew Yerkevich, a marketing manager for Eppendorf SE and your moderator here today in Hamburg, Germany. We're all very excited to have you here, joining us for the latest installment in our series of webinars on digitalization entitled How to Green and Digitalize Your Lab. In this webinar, we would like to highlight the advantages and challenges of both going green and digitalization in the laboratory. You'll gain insights in how to build a digitalized and sustainable laboratory so that you can enjoy the best of both worlds. I'm excited to welcome our two expert presenters. Anne-Claire Feucht is the Global Marketing Manager for Digitalization at Eppendorf SE, who is responsible for building partnerships and managing the go-to-market activities for Eppendorf Digital Lab Solutions. Hello, Anne-Claire. It's great to have you here today. How are you?
Hi, Matthew. Thanks. I'm really fine.
Wonderful.
How are you?
Thanks for coming. Now, joining Anne-Claire as an expert presenter is Jan Heinrich Biebermeier, Global Marketing Manager for Sustainability at Eppendorf SE. Jan has been a leader with Eppendorf for over 15 years and believes that labs of today and tomorrow can improve the human living condition while being responsible and sustainable. Hello, Jan. It's wonderful to see you. How is it going?
Good morning, Matthew. Thanks. I'm fine. And you?
I'm great. Thanks for being here. Now, before Anne-Claire and Jan get started, I'd like to take a moment to direct your attention to the interactive portion of Eppendorf Lab Channel. If you look to the right of the screen, you'll see a chat window. Feel free to use this space for any comments, questions, or reactions you might have. One of our Eppendorf applications experts is monitoring the chat and are ready to help. After the presentation is completed, we'll have a question and answer period where Anne-Claire and Jan can address any questions you may have included in the chat. You can also message us for information about demos and more in-depth conversations. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over the reins to Anne-Claire and Jan. The stage is yours.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, also a warm welcome again from my side. And we are glad into sustainability and digitalization with you for the laboratory space. And with that, I jump right into our topic, our webinar topic for today. You all joined the webinar via our virtual event platform, Eppendorf Lab Channel, instead of meeting us in person, maybe on a trade show or a certain conference. And we see that today's technology revolution is transforming virtually every aspect of our life as we know it. You didn't have to hop on a plane or you drive your car to see us at the certain event location. Digital technologies in the form of electronic processes and communication services, but also robotics and or even cost or resource saving solutions could help achieve a more sustainable planet. And to guide you through the next 30 minutes, I quickly want to share the areas we will cover in our presentation. In this webinar, we'll start off with some mega trends which will impact our world we live on. We will discuss the matter of sustainable digitalization and also on how digitalization could look like in the lab, how you can implement certain activities, certain features to help you smarten your lab, but also green your lab. Furthermore, we will also share insights into the independent certifications, helping you to green your lab, but also how certain ideas can help you leverage best of both worlds. And with that, let's jump right in. There are certain mega trends on the horizon, and the directions we go and the choices we make will have enormous impact on our lives, careers, businesses, the society, and in general, the entire world of how important trends will evolve by 2030. Thinking here about the demographics. Nowadays, we live much longer than our ancestors, and the prediction is that there will be about 1 billion more of us. Researchers predict that the world should reach 8.5 billion people by 2030. Another mega trend is also the urbanization. 2/3 of us will live in cities. It's already quite common that larger cities, a lot of people live in larger cities, and the urbanization of our populations will increase, creating more mega cities as well as small to mid-sized metropolises. This has an effect on our infrastructure, thinking about the large volume of traffic we experience in bigger cities, the traffic jams. This also requires more big buildings with better management technologies. And we will, of course, need to move more food in from where we grow it, maybe the countryside, and also to the places where we eat it. Or we rapidly expand into urban agriculture, thinking also about cities where we have extreme weathers, maybe in Dubai, where they already start exploring urban agriculture. Another trend is also transparency. We are more connected than ever. We right now see this. We are in a webinar, a virtual space where people from all over the world can take place. And we share more information than 10 years ago. And this will also expand in the future. And though the next years predict that our world will become even more open and less private. And it's hard to imagine that the trend of tracking everything will be going anywhere than in one direction, a radically more open world. And the amount of information we collect also grows exponentially. The tools to analyze information will be well developed by then, thinking about now 10 years ahead. And we will have also some more decision-making tools which make our decision-making much easier. For instance, it will be easier for us to choose products with the lowest carbon footprints and so on. This leads me also to the climate crisis. This is the topic of emissions, which has been on everyone's lips and is still on everyone's lips. The voices for dramatic actions, but also the pressure on politics has increased dramatically over the past 2 years. And thinking here about initiatives like Fridays for Future. So the results of the climate change are unrelenting, and the climate will continue to change frequently and feature frequent and extreme weathers everywhere. And we also see that the natural and thinking ahead of the future, by 2030, we will have a much better clarity on how bad the coming decades after that point will be. This leads me also to the resource pressure. We are forced to more aggressively confront resource constraints. We already experience this in small segments already nowadays, but resources are declining and we already feel the impact. And there is a higher need now to recycle content, to remanufacture our products, but also a generally rethinking of how our material economy has to change. And this leads me also to clean tech. Due to continuing drops in costs of clean technologies, renewable energy is dramatically on the rise. There's also the question impacting with the sustainability question, how we can use different ways to produce energy, maybe with water or sunlight and so on. Also an explosion of data-driven technologies that make buildings, the grid roadways and water systems more sustainable. And this brings me also to the technology shift. The Internet of Things has become a term we can all relate to, and it will in the future win the day, so that every new device will be connected. And the mentioned trends tell us a bit of how our future will look like, but it also opens us doors today, especially when it comes to clean tech, concerning about the climate crisis, the resource pressure, and also the shifts in technologies. They are of interest as we today want to focus in our webinar on how we can leverage sustainability and digitalization for the laboratory space and how both will affect and reinforce each other. And this leads me also to the question, what means sustainability? And it means meeting our own needs without compromising the needs, compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And in addition to natural resources, we also need social and economic resources. And sustainability is really becoming a driving the economic revolution. And with this just mentioned global trends, they will define the way the sustainability revolution will look like and how we can shape our economy and the social outcomes. And definitely what we can see is that the digital transformation has the potential to decouple emissions, the resource use from economic growth. And there are, of course, certain barriers we have to overcome and which need to be addressed. And we see this also in the news. The politicians are forced to make certain decisions and there's this increasing pressure on the world's resources and an urgent need to cut emissions, thinking about our carbon footprint and so on. And we really see that digital transformation can help set the world's economy on a sustainable footprint. How could this look like? The digital age definitely has great potential for sustainability. We already can see this today, thinking about smart homes, for example, where we can optimize the energy consumption at home. We can regulate the heating from the distance, but also intelligent transport systems. They guide us through the traffic so that there is fewer emission in bigger cities. This is based on smart data, but also automobile manufacturers. They leverage data to offer new ways of mobility, thinking here about car sharing concepts. So not everyone in a big city has to drive his or her own car and owns his or her own car. They are also highly investing into developing smarter, more sustainable battery solutions so that we can drive with electronic cars and have a much higher distance to overcome with those. Another interesting fact is also smart consumption. New technologies in form of apps can help us to avoid food waste, thinking here about food sharing apps. So we see that digital tools could help create circular economies, radically reduce greenhouse emissions, promoting renewable energies, and also monitor and protect our ecosystems we live in. And also with that webinar today here, we see that we can open virtual spaces which enable communication across the globe, but also offer joint learning between people around the globe. In this way, we can foster a global culture of cooperation, which is a definitely smart and nice side effect of digitalization and sustainability. So the question is now how we can leverage digitalization for a greener and smarter lab environment. And despite the shift in the way we work, the lab as such remains in the early stages of adopting digitalization. And lab personnel, for instance, is still recording experiment protocols and results manually with a logbook, and sample location in the freezer is still being traced manually using a spreadsheet. And we can definitely support the digital and sustainable transformation of the lab by using smart lab infrastructure, using data, and regulate the consumption, maybe in terms of consumables. There are new tools outside on the marketplace, like electronic lab notebooks or digital lab management systems. They are introduced, and with that, we see that the Lab 4.0, the smart connected lab, is advancing. Over the past years, we have seen that we quickly adopted digital technologies, especially also to cope with the new norms of social distancing, the remote work, and also restricted access to lab benches. And the past years have proven that digitalization is central to every interaction, whether on an individual or organizational level. And it has fast-tracked also the acceptance of digital solutions. And especially with thinking here about the COVID-19, the pandemic, the rising need for greater sample safety with the higher amount of PCR tests, but also the conformity with increasing compliance pressures and optimized lab management practices to support a more agile workforce. We see that there is this need for digital transformation in the laboratory space. And to meet the new needs and overcome the challenges in laboratories worldwide, we especially from Eppendorf want to accompany our customers on their digital transformation journey by shaping new innovations based on pain points and challenges you as a lab user face every day. And we would like to shape them together with you. But also we pursue clear goals that will make our company increasingly sustainable. The question is now, how to digitize the lab and where to get started. And in this way, let's have a look at a typical lab day. It begins with retrieval of your samples, reagents, consumables you need to get started for your experimentation. And once you're set up, you begin preparing your samples for experimentation, such as cloning, next generation sequencing, or genotyping, just to name here a few examples. And during your workflow, you will also collect data such as DNA, RNA concentrations, amplicon sizes from running a gel. And then at the end of the day, you will take a look at your results and see if the experiments need to be repeated or if you're ready to pursue the next step. And more often than not, we run into issues throughout the day, whether we can't find our samples, the reagents are contaminated, the equipment isn't functioning, or even data isn't available. And with that, I would like to dive deeper into the preparation setbacks. So when was the last time you opened the freezer and couldn't find or correctly identify your sample? So the writing on tubes, they can wear off during the storage or processing with the regular wear due to certain chemicals you're using. They can also be mislabeled, so you cannot really identify what is in this tube, for example. One step you can proceed is here switching to printed labels. They are certainly an improvement over handwriting labels, but they can also fall off during storage or during the processing. And they still require you to reach each individual sample to find one you need. And if a sample can't be identified, and it can also be traced back, right? So the inability to identify a sample correctly may lead also to unreliable data. And today's technology, they can ease up on that pain. There's software out there which help you to digitalize your inventory, manage your inventory system. And just to name here an example is the eLab Next inventory management software. This can help you to organize any type of sample in your lab, and you can fully configure it so it works for your unique environment. If you're interested in monitoring your freezer's condition to prevent sample loss, this can be easily set up. And this can give you the peace of mind just that you are comfortable, you can focus on your research instead of worrying about your samples. There are platforms out there offering sample monitoring, parameter monitoring options. For instance, the digital platform von Eppendorf called Digitalized Lab Suite. This way you can easily connect your instruments, be it an Eppendorf or non-Eppendorf instrument, your freezers, for instance, and you can monitor as well as track back the parameters. Thinking here about the temperature conditions and so on. And thinking a bit about the used consumables, there's also new types of consumables, such as the safe good system for Eppendorf cryo storage vials, which are based on barcode. This way you can easily secure your samples and safely identify them. And of course, as consumable tends to be plastic, we as a company are also interested in offering new and more sustainable solutions to contribute to a more sustainable world. When thinking about the experimentation, you may face issues with liquid handling, since most workflows in the lab require you to handle liquids. And with manual pipetting, the source of errors is largely due to the person who's holding the pipette in the hand. And when pipetting, there are some different things you never think about. Are you conscious about how far down the well you're pipetting? The way you pipette also varies from the way another user would do. There are also these factors contributing to non-reproducible and varying results. And during the experimentation, you might also run into the risk of cross-contamination due to the droplets or forgetting in which well you were pipetting into. And finally, you may not even complete your experiments for the day, with the fact that the process of manual pipetting is really time-consuming. And maybe in the beginning, when you're starting out, your lab may only require a benchtop electronic pipette. So for plate stamping and reagent addition. And maybe as your lab expands or your requirements change, you may need a liquid handle such as the EpiMotion series, so that you can process even more samples or handle more difficult protocols. So what we also have been developing too is digitalizing our liquid handling portfolio. So there is an electronic pipette existing, an electronic pipette system called the Visualized Pipette Manager, which is a system ideal for scientists who manage a high workload and require many intricate pipetting steps. So this way, the solution helps you to improve speed, the accuracy and efficiency and collaboration as well. And this is also where connectivity and the Internet of Things come into place. And in addition to the issue we are facing when pipetting and preparing our samples, we might come across also unforeseen issues with our equipment. It could be as simple as someone is inputting incorrect device parameters for our experiment, or we were wasting time for your colleague to finish using the equipment. So you're waiting so that one equipment, maybe the centrifuge or the shaker, gets free. Another challenge is also that most labs are facing is with equipment, whether the instrument hasn't been calibrated, thinking here about uncalibrated pipettes or centrifuge, or it requires service. So when this is there and you're facing that issue, this can cause long delays, and it put a stop on all of your work, and maybe it delays it for weeks or months. And in today's digital service landscape for laboratories, there are new ways to easily plan, manage, track the instrument fleet so that you have your lab is up and running. You can monitor your device status even remotely, and you can also schedule in one tool maintenance activities and document them also, the execution of those maintenance activities. Another feature could be also booking instruments ahead prior to your experimentation. Moving from the experimentation is also one step is the data collection. You also need to collect data and record them during the day of your experimentation. And sometimes you can be in a rush, record your data on a Post-it, paper tool, or even a notebook, which is paper-based. If you're in case a bit more organized. And the issue with that is that data can easily be lost or misinterpreted. And when trying to share or present this data with the team, it can be difficult to locate it and even share it if it's not in one place. And this also leads me to unreliable data analysis. Once you're ready to pull all of your data together, it can be time consuming because you have to get it from multiple data formats, such as reporting, download reports from different instruments, combining it with handwritten notes, and having to combine several different format types can also lead to forgetting to pull information from a specific instrument or another part of your experiment, causing missed analysis. And to switch from paper-based documentation nowadays is quite easy. There are tools such as electronic lab notebooks like the eLab journal. They help you to easily digitalize information and keep your experiment data complete in one source. And lab execution systems like our Eppendorf experiment management would go even one step further by offering a software solution which is truly digitalizing your entire experiment. So it's not only digitalizing the design of how you design a protocol, but it's offering you easier ways to design protocols and workflows with the drag and drop steps for high reproducibility and adaptability, and it also guides you through the experiment so that user variability is maybe kept to a low minimum and helps you to do the exact same time every time. And it's also recording what comes from the instruments, what labware you're using, which sample is being used to the experimentation. And this shows us that IoT can also help us enrich our experiment documentation with scientific results and data from connected instruments. And all those aspects offer us a digital smart lab, so to say. And if I'm moving on, we see that digitalization not only offers us data integrity and accessibility, it also offers us increased efficiency in the lab because we can streamline our processes. On the other hand, it offers us peace of mind since we are maybe not worried about our samples. We can feel that peace of mind because we have them securely stored and monitor the status of the instrument they are stored in. So it helps us that keeps our samples secure. It also improves collaboration because we have the ability to share data and results quickly. And we can also ensure the optimal performance of devices and audit management. And by seeing the advantages of digitalization, we see also aspects of sustainability. And just as the digital revolution transformed how we live and work, so will it also sustainability, driving new value and growth, permitting everything what we need to do. And with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague Jan, who will share independent certifications and brings the focus of sustainability into that.
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Claire. So as we just learned, there are different advantages of digitalization in the lab. And you may ask yourself now, okay, and what's the connection? What's the linkage towards sustainability? Because, you know, on the one side, there are a lot of pros for digitalization to improve the situation in the lab, but then you would also like to know, okay, what kind of impact does it have on the sustainability of my lab procedures? And let's start a little bit on a formalistic level. That means about certifications. Why is that? Pretty simple, because companies are, let's be honest, they can show you nice glory pictures, nice statements, but as you're a scientist with a scientific background education, you will ask yourself, okay, is there any independency? Is there any proof? And that is why there's a growing need for independent checks and certifications of statements of our community. And one of these parties is Energy Star. You may know them from, well, your computer screen, your washing machine, if you look at it in the US, or any kind of electronic, well, consumer instrumentation. But these guys are also working with lab suppliers. That means especially, or only in the moment, for cooling equipment like ULT freezers, fridges, and standard freezers. They do offer independent certification by measuring different performance data and then certify it as an independent check. And that's something where we do it with our freezers. Okay, freezers is not everything. So what else is there available in the field? Besides Energy Star, there is another NGO, international one, called My Green Lab. They are located in the US but acting worldwide in the moment. And they offer a broad range of independent certifications, not only limited to products, where they call it the ACT label, analyzing the life cycle of a product. We can find different products on this page already listed, so there are more than 2,000 listed. But they also interact with you as users in the labs by supporting the certification of the lab, so the workload in the lab, give recommendations and indications how it can improve. And that's something what is also of high interest, how really to improve the daily routine work in the lab. They are part of this UN Race to Zero campaign within the pharma industry. And they are, as you can see here on the slide, more than 800 labs in different countries, again, in the complete Western world, involved already. And a nice, let's say, self-training system is called Green Ambassador Program. And there you can just teach yourself online how to learn different aspects about more sustainable aspects in the lab and how you can improve your own skills. And what you see on the right side, pretty much everything with a name in the community on the supplier side is nowadays cooperating with My Green Lab. So it's not something like a small, tiny bit of fraction, but it's really a broad range of companies is cooperating with these folks just to have a common understanding, a common sense for sustainability in the lab. Okay, I mean, those are two examples of certification for lab equipment, lab consumables. But the point is, remember, the topic of this webinar is digitalization sustainability. And honestly, I had a few chats with the colleagues of my Green Lab about software and digitalization in respect to sustainability. And they said, yeah, that's a coming trend. That's a coming topic where we have to find ways how to check and certify digitalization. But in the moment, we are not really in the situation where we can really do some certification of software and digitalization. So that's something which is still at the beginning. And I think that's good to know. When addressing this formalistic certification process, that's one chapter of the story. But what about the real situation in the lab? So let's go one level deeper into the real life. What kind of issues do we face in respect to sustainability in the lab life? The major one, I think everyone is aware of, is the plastic, the consumables which we use on a daily routine basis in the labs, resulting in full bags of waste at the end of the day. And for sure, again, we have the shiny, glory, clean plastic in the beginning, and finally, we end up with a lot of waste on our bench and in the waste bins of in the autoclave. But there are ways to optimize that, and that's the connection towards sustainability. So that means the organization of supply, the stock management, the ordering of new consumables, that can be handled by an improved software solution. That means that you have a stock management, that you combine sales approaches, buying approaches of specific parts of equipment, so consumables. So that means you have less emissions for the transportation. So instead of getting every day a single package, you will get a big pallet of consumables once a week or once a month. There's less packaging material. So the digitalization of the buying process have a positive impact on your footprint on the consumable side. Another topic for sustainability are cooling liquids or cooling of samples. As Anne-Claire mentioned, the freezers are one part of that story, independent of which temperature between +4 degrees Celsius down to -80 degrees Celsius, but also cooling liquids in centrifuges and shakers, because they also use cooling liquids. How can we now combine it with digitalization? Pretty simple. So we can think about maintenance of these equipment. And don't laugh at me. Even freezers and fridges do need maintenance over their lifetime, because they're doing their job somewhere down the hallway in your institution. No one really thinks about them. They are just there, these big boxes being cold or cool. But do you really care about removing the ice and the snow? What about if your software is just giving you an indication on your mobile phone or your smartwatch? Hey, did you thought about cleaning the freezer this month already? That will save energy. That will expand their lifetime for sure. Then, as Anne-Claire just mentioned, sample management. So how to optimize the storage in your freezer, because you have a limited number of storage spaces there, something like 50,000 samples, if they are packed in a very efficient manner. You can do it freestyle with bags, but that's not really efficient. Last point on the list for freezers or cooled refrigerant is really the preventive maintenance. So if you have an online monitoring of your tools, there may be in the near future, and I'm pretty sure of that, indications that software can really track and trace little, let's say, signs of trouble and give you a pre-warning like, oh, I have now summed up, let's say, 10 pre-warnings. That's giving you the next level of middle level warning for the lifetime of the instrumentation. Instrumentation do need power. And just to give you an example of what we do in our facilities, where pretty much all Eppendorf products are nowadays based on 100% renewable energy in our production facilities, that is something where we did our job to adapt the power supply at Eppendorf. Coming back to the freezers, when we produce them, they have to fulfill a 24 hours test before we send it to the warehouse and finally to you as a user. And as you know, freezers producing cold on the one side, but also a lot of heat on the other side. So that means our factory is using this heat as a supporting heat generation for the heating system. So in winter times, they do need less gas and oil to heat up the factory just based on the freezer heat generation of the test runs. And those are hundreds and thousands of units over the time. For sure, in summer times, that's a little bit of a problem, at least in the UK, where our factory is located. There's also some warm in the summer times. But anyway, and these two topics of electric power as well as heat usage is also of interest for digitalization, because there are two aspects of digitalization, especially when you talk about server systems, that is the power consumption as well as the generation of heat. So let's check how we can now have a look on real digitalization in the lab and what kind of impact does it have on your sustainable footprint. So we can do a lot, as Anne-Claire already started to present or to mention and describe, is the documentation of processes. So we can really digitalize all our documentation. We can handle the instrumentation management, the device management, equipment management on a better way. So to reduce the free time of instrumentation, so to have a more efficient usage of instrumentation, that you can really monitor all the parameters and getting pre-warnings if there's maintenance or anything more urgent to do. You save space and time and resources when you do sample management, not only the freezers, but also chemical reagent management, all that stuff. So that means there are ways to optimize your capacities. For sure, we all as scientists love to go to conferences, but we learned in the last 2 years, there are also online conferences where we can benefit from, as we do not need to travel. We do not need to pay high prices to have a flight to somewhere in the world. For sure, that's also an adventure. But on the other side, it generates a lot of CO2. But we'll come to that in a second. And there's also a strong tendency towards digital modeling of, well, molecule structures of any kind of, let's say, designing molecules instead of doing the classic, let's call it wet lab layout of experiments as we're used to. What does it mean? So power is key, as I mentioned. And what we see on the graphic on the right side, there was some analysis that if we just combine all the energy which is used for the World Wide Web, the internet, and all related functions, that is as high as 3% of the global power consumption, just for the internet. And I think on the one side, 3% looks like not significant because it's below 5%, but on the other side, 3%, that's more than countries like Germany, similar to Japan, and I think bigger than most of the countries in the world, beside the really big ones in the world. So 3% is a lot of power. Question is, okay, how much of this power is really based on green energy? Because when we have a look on here's some data from two major suppliers of cloud systems, Microsoft and Amazon. And for sure, they realized, okay, this topic of power sources is important for their business, but they still have a way to go. So that means both of them are, I mean, let's face it, they are, let's also respect that. They do have goals for 2025 to switch to 100% green power or renewable power, but that's still in the near future. Question is now for all of us, okay, how much power or which kind of power do we consume for our digitalization in the lab? And for sure, that strongly depends also, the impact of power generation depends on where we are located. So you can see some examples here, how much CO2 is, let's say, produced per kilowatt hour of power. And that can't be something very low, like in Finland or Switzerland, where they have a lot of water power-based electricity. In Europe, we have something like 230 grams. In Australia, where a lot of power is coming from coal, burning coal, they end up with 660 grams. So a server located in Australia is more than 3 times or nearly 3 times, well, more dirtier, you can really say, compared to European average, based on the type of power you're using. So the question of where's your power coming from is really key to to calculate your footprint for digitalization. Beside the power, there's also the question of hardware, because hardware for digitalization has a very short lifetime. Let's face it. I mean, we are all used, unfortunately, to these kind of 2 to 3 years lifetime of our mobile phones, and then it's already outdated after 5 to 6 years. They're not working anymore with the existing operating systems. Similar with our lab equipment. I mean, for sure, the companies are using industry standard parts of electronics, but still, the more electronic you have, the higher the risk that you have these called generational changes of hardware, and they are not supported anymore in the future. And that's something we all have to address. I mentioned the data modeling. What does it mean? I mean, we are going more and more in this calculation of models. So that means we are not really doing class experiments, but doing theoretical approaches based on software analysis and software modeling. And here you see some examples where we have, for example, for sure, modeling in the astronomical area. That's the highest level of CO2 production. But that means there's a study saying or stating that we have between 3.5 and 4.5 tons of CO2 per year per researcher in this area. So just based on their computer-based research. Now we can say, well, that's a different approach, not in the life science industry or life science research. But even there, if we look on the middle examples, a DNA analysis is still, depending on how many bases you calculate in your DNA, between 4.5 and 17 kilograms of CO2 just on one analysis. Virus analysis, if you do some simulation, that could be even worse. That means between 80 and 95 kilograms of CO2 just for 100 nucleotides. So that is something which is of high impact. But what does it mean, CO2 and all these kilograms? I mean, if we check on the right side, the reference point, a car currently takes between 10 and 14 kilograms of CO2 per 100 kilometers if you drive it. So that means we can calculate it that one TMV, so tobacco mosaic virus analysis, could end up on the similar CO2 exposure than driving 100 kilometers in an average car in Europe, or even going, let's say, from Hamburg to Frankfurt in Germany, or from Amsterdam to Paris just by car, doing one little analysis. Again, this is an aspect to keep in mind when you talk about your power supply, for example. Last but not least, there are topics which are really of high interest in respect to digitalization. That is the traveling, because I mean, scientists love to share their learnings on conferences. That means they would like to present data, they would like to present results. And again, there was a calculation done during the pandemic about a specific, let's say, conference which was done in 2019 as an on-stage session, where they calculated a total travel emission of nearly 2,000 tons of CO2 equivalents. And then in 2020, so 1 year later, because everyone was banned to stay at home, they did it in a virtual tour. And based on their analytics, they end up with nearly 0.5 ton of CO2, which is a drastic reduction of CO2. So going digital in scientific presentations, scientific conferences, is saving a lot of CO2, directly as well as indirectly. There are more people able to join because traveling costs money. So that means most of the time it's only the big boss who's going to a conference, or only people from the richer countries. So it's also a question of social impact, that with online interactions, people from all over the globe are able to join because it's far cheaper. You don't spend 1 or 2 days traveling just one way, so you can join. But the drawback is you have less social contact, because let's face it, it's far more fun to meet colleagues in real and having a beer in the evening compared to having a 6 hours online session on Teams or Zoom or you name it. So there are pros and cons for this one. And I think the future will end up in a mixture hybrid way that we do have online conferences, but also, again, hopefully on-site conferences as we are used to. So summarizing this one, we can really say there are a lot of connection points between digitalization and sustainability. And that could be, as mentioned, on the one side, the data handling, data management. It could be the device management, service predictions, exchange on conferences, which is pretty much like knowledge sharing, experience sharing. So a lot of aspects where we really see a direct interaction between these two headlines, which are the topics of the near future. So when we talk about the connected lab, it's always a journey. So it's not based on a single aspect. It's based on different aspects which interact. So as a strong recommendation, we can really say, okay, don't focus only on one little box where you improve in respect to digitalization as well as in respect to sustainability, but always have a look on the complete picture in your lab, in your team, in your working group, in your institution, because that is broadening up your opportunities to improve things. Because if you just focus on one topic, you have to spend far more effort and time, and you see slow progress. But if you broaden up your scope, you have the chances to really optimize the conditions in the lab in a faster way. And with that one, thanks for your time. Appreciate you joining the session, and would like to give back to Matthew.
That was a very insightful presentation. We're very excited to have you here today. Now we got a couple questions that we were hoping to ask you as follow-up to what you just presented. The first was, where do you see any quick and easy wins when digitalizing in the laboratory?
I can take that over, Matthew. Actually, we could think of starting with digitalizing the sample journey. You can easily invest into new consumables with barcode, which help you to easily identify the samples, but also facilitate the storing process of the sample with having inventory management systems digitalized with software like eLab Next, for instance. I can't hear you, but I think there was a second question.
Still muted, Matthew?
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, guys. How do you see the impact of consumables? Is Eppendorf making a more sustainable solution or working on a more sustainable solution?
Yeah, we do. So there are two aspects. On the one side, how can you reduce the number of consumables? That is in respect to being more efficient in the lab by having sample management systems to really optimize the usage of consumables, but also the question of consumables need to fulfill a specific level of quality in the lab, because there are high expectations on that one, that you have a high level of purity, sterility, that they are available in the given numbers you need, and that the price is also on the level which you can afford. And therefore, we are working on different aspects to improve the footprint of consumables by, looking on different resources. So the usage of recycling material, the usage of bio-based material, how we can optimize, let's say, end of life of consumables. So that means potential recycling of parts of that one. There's also a question of biohazard in the lab that must be addressed and solved. But in principle, really to check what's possible also on mass production, because that's another challenge for us as a supplier. But there are ways in the near future where there will be a strong improvement for sustainable consumables in the lab.
Okay. Another question is, what about the impact of platforms for data storage in the context of energy consumption and things like big data?
I can take that. Actually, storing data, there are different ways of storing data. You have maybe an on-premise installation, maybe a public or private cloud. We, for instance, for our digital platform called Visualized Lab Suite, we are using a cloud-based infrastructure, and the partner here we are working is Microsoft Azure. And as Jan was stating, these partners, you should maybe pay also attention how they are working with renewable energy. And Microsoft Azure, for instance, is 100% renewable energy by 2025. I think this is something where we have start making decisions, what is the right partner for us. And of course, the servers, they use energy, right? And so how do you run those servers with which kind of energy is one thing you can pay more attention to. So choosing the right partner which works for you and your lab, but also we as manufacturers, we need to choose the right partner for us to offer our solution landscape.
I have another question about a user case. Let's assume I want to replace something like my 4-year-old cycler and get a brand new one which can be connected to the cloud with all these nice features. Is there a way to calculate the savings that digitalization provides for me? I mean, the production of the new cycler also consumes energy and resources.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, and also a challenging one, because calculating the life cycle of a product like a Scope 3 analysis is really a big chunk of work. And I think our community is still in the beginning to have really calculations about the life cycle of, well, lab products. And for sure that will come. But in the moment, honestly, I think it would be a very rough assumption instead of really a scientific calculation of the life cycle. So for sure, you just mentioned it, the production of a new piece of equipment consumes resources, consumes energy. And the question is really, I mean, that is something which after some time can be calculated. But then we have this challenge of, let's call it, how do you calculate the digital footprint? And that's something, I mean, don't get me wrong, there will be, I think, 1, 2, 3 years ahead of us that will be possible. But I think in the moment, that's really difficult to predict which one makes sense. Keep the cycler if it's still running, or to go for a new one where you can benefit from the digital solutions.
Okay. You had mentioned during the presentation the use of energy suppliers and where you get your energy from, but many labs have no impact on the power for their equipment. This tends to be handled by their purchasing department or their maintenance facilities. Do you have any recommendation on how to influence that?
Yeah, that's a question we are confronted with more and more in the labs in our discussions with our users, because that's totally true. I mean, if you're just working as a technician or a scientist or even a PI in the lab, the power is coming by the building and you have absolutely no impact. But on the other side, I mean, nowadays green power is price-wise pretty much on the same level than, let's say, classic power based on gas and oil and coal. So it's not a question of money. It's more a question of what kind of contract does your institution have. So is it a short-term, mid-term, long-term contract with a power supplier? But I would just address it. Address it to the procurement team, address it also to the branding, corporate communication, or the university leadership team. I mean, let's face it, it's also an image topic. I mean, if you don't get them by how much better it is for the environment, perhaps you can get them by the image question that, well, if University XYZ or pharma company XYZ is now switching to green power, that is well accepted by the public. So try different ways to make your colleagues aware, okay, think about it, it makes sense. And again, the power is not that expensive anymore. It was different 5 years ago, but nowadays, green power has an acceptable price level.
Okay, I actually have one more question. It's a follow-up to your presentation, Jan. The carbon footprint of the genome-wide association studies or the simulation of the molecule. Do you have the time period on that, or of the experiments? Was it per day, per run, per?
I think it was for a very short time period, because I mean these simulations, these calculations are done on very specific moments of the molecule structure behavior. So you do not really do, let's say, minutes and hours of simulation, but you really simulate specific approaches and moments of a molecule when there's a folding or any kind of digestion or any kind of aligning. And this process you would like to understand, that's what you want to see on the screen. So that means this time period is a very short one. So you can imagine if you do several of them to have several seconds of calculation, that is, well, increasing your power consumption and therefore your CO2 emission a lot.
Okay. Another associated question with that carbon footprint is you were talking about server locations and where you're hosting and the amount. So do we know if these cloud-based solutions are better over local servers, or is it more about where it, local or international? It's more about where they're drawing their power from.
I think it's more from where they draw their power from. So there you have to clearly monitor what's your provider and what they are offering in terms of renewable energy and the promise they make for the future.
I think there's also a question of where the server is located, because a lot of servers are located in Southern California. As we all know, there's hot and dry, so that means they need a lot of power to drive the air conditions there. So there's a tendency on cloud suppliers, cloud providers, to set up the server farms in, let's say, Nordic countries, because there it's far more cooler, so you do not need so much energy to handle the heat extension of the cloud farms.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour, and I want to thank you guys so much, Claire and Jan, for your presentation. It was great to learn so much about digitalization and sustainability and the solutions in the modern lab. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Matthew.
Now, to learn more about Visionize and the Eppendorf digitalization future, visit eppendorf.com/visionize. Find out how Eppendorf and Visionize are your lab software solution for effective lab and maintenance management. One platform offering the options and tools you need. You can request a demo today. For more information about sustainability efforts at Eppendorf, visit eppendorf.com/sustainability. Learn about how you can improve sustainability in your lab. I want to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next broadcast entitled Good Culture for Your Cells, Best Practices for Preventing Contamination. On March 31st, application specialist Jessica Wagner will teach you how to recognize and identify different types of contaminants in cultivated cells. We'll also discuss how to apply aseptic techniques, preventive hygiene, and give practical tips for preventing contamination by incorporating standard procedures into your daily culture practice. You can go to eppendorf.com/lab channel to save the date in your calendar. Now, if you miss out on this broadcast or any of our past events, you can also view all our previous episodes on demand at your own time at eppendorf.com/lab channel. Watch them all and use the links to contact the experts with any questions, comments, or reactions. Now, on behalf of Claire, Jan, and everyone else here at Eppendorf Lab Channel, thank you for taking the time to join us. And until we see you again, stay safe and have a wonderful day.